the anatomical and technical principles of E-TEP for inguinal hernia. Now, what I was saying was E-TEP is a procedure which is now being touted as a new thing. And let me tell you, until about 1 year back, I was just doing TAPPs for my inguinal hernias. Why? Because TEP was very, very cumbersome. The space was too small and there were a lot of pneumoperitoneums created. And in all, it was very unsatisfying kind of an experience for me, people who were doing it. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm talking to myself. But the moment I started doing E-TEP and I had done the first 3 or 4 cases, I was so happy with this procedure that I've minimized doing TAPP, and now majority of my patients are being, inguinal hernia patients are being tackled by the E-TEP repair. So why this? Let's see what is the anatomical principles behind the E-TEP repair. Because you have to understand certain things about the abdominal wall before you understand what E-TEP is all about. E basically stands for extended TP repair or extended view. This is basically the extended view. Now, if you look at the abdomen, just a very short about the anatomy, if you look at the abdomen, you see that there is number one, the semilunar line or spiegel. Now, this lunar line extends from the 9th costal cartilage to the pubic tubercle. So, this is pubic tubercle number 8, and this is the 9th costal cartilage. It is curved for the simple reason that the 9th ribs are further apart than the pubic tubercle. So the discrepancy between these two distances creates the curved semilunar line. And the posterior sheath is the posterior sheath that ends at the arcuate line of Douglas or the semicircular line. Now these are the two things which are very important for understanding what the E-TEP repair is, along with the sheath of the rectus abdominis muscle. So this whole thing is the sheath. The semilunar line, the arcuate line, and this is the sheath of the rectus abdominis. This is the umbilicus out here, right? Now, what about the two things very important when you do a E-TEP repair? Two things are important. Number one, understanding what the sheath is all about. And number two, where is the inferior epigastric artery? Are we going to damage it or not? Now, if you look at the inferior epigastric artery in the sheath, see, it is traveling from the mid-inguinal point and it is entering the sheath at the arcuate line. It's entering it out here. Now, when it enters the sheath, it lies slightly to the lateral to the midline. So, if it's the middle of the sheath, it's lying lateral. So, from the midline, this is the midline umbilicus, the distance have been measured. This was a study, very good study done in, I think, 2017. And these are the distances of the inferior epigastric artery from the midline. So 4.1 plus minus 1.2 centimeters, and inside the sheath 4.5. That means basically, roughly from the midline, you'll find the inferior epigastric and the superior epigastric about 3 or 4.5 to this would be 3.5 to 5.5 centimeters, which basically theoretically it would be either you can enter the sheath here or you can enter the sheath here, medial to the vessel or lateral to the vessel. Now, entering lateral to the vessel would be slightly problematic because the space out here is limited as compared to the space medial to the vessel. And that is why the best method of entering the sheath is medial to the vessel by splitting the fibers of the rectus abdomen. So you're going to split the fibers of the rectus medial to the inferior epigastric is always better and safer. And the entry point should be 3 to 4 centimeters lateral to the midline. So if you're entering 3 to 4 centimeters here, the inferior epigastric is lateral. So you're entering in this area. So you're not going to, you're not liable to damage the inferior epigastric artery, right? And the entry port at this point, entry port at this point creates a lateral movement for the telescope, which I'll show you in the next figure as compared. Now you can have, see this figure. Either you pushed in your telescope here or you push in the telescope more towards the midline, right? Now what is lying out here? The linea alba. Can you traverse to the opposite side through the linea alba? No, you can't. You can only traverse below the arcuate line and only then hope to go to the contralateral side. Now, most of the ETPs that are done, the telescope is usually put on the same side or the opposite side. I'll just show you. Now, if the telescope is put here, trying to negotiate the telescope and seeing the opposite side is easier than putting the telescope more medial and trying to visualize the opposite side. It is just pure, simple physical principle. So that is why trying to place it. So you could well say, why place the port 3 centimeters from the umbilicus laterally? Why? Why not only 1 centimeter by the side of the umbilicus? You can do that. But then your view would be limited to the contralateral side. Ipsilateral, yes, you can see everything out here, but here you can't see anything. So this port position helps you in seeing the opposite side. The second thing is the rectus abdominis that we have to know, which you're going to split the fibers, and these splitting of the fibers are the 3 constant or 4th occasional horizontal tendinous intersections. The best part of this intersection is that these intersections are only between the muscle and the anterior rectus sheath. They do not make any intersection with the posterior rectus sheath. Which means what? Which means that the retrorectus part is absolutely hollow, so to say. That means there is no intersection there. If you enter the retrorectus part, you can easily negotiate the whole thing. And that is the principle of ETEP repair. So these intersections which are there at the level of umbilicus, xiphoid, and the third midway are the constant 3 ones. But those who have got those 4 packs, the 3 packs or the 4 pack, there is 6 pack. The 4th pack is basically the 4th intersection found at the level below the umbilicus. Now, these are dividing the longitudinal muscle, converting into short muscles and giving it added strength and added function. Now, the rectus sheath. What is the rectus sheath all about? See the width of the sheath. Can you see the width of the sheath? 6 to 6.8 centimeters here. Maybe slightly less out here. So we are talking about 3 centimeters above. So in this region, we got almost 6 centimeters and we are creating an opening at, let's say, 4 centimeters. So we got 2 centimeters behind. So we are safe that we are inside the sheath. Why do we want to stay inside the sheath? Because we have a very, very self-created area of the retrorectus space. Let me tell you, you can also enter the preperitoneal even beyond the semicircular line. Don't go with the impression in mind that ETP can only be done from inside the rectus sheath. No, let me tell you, it can also be done from outside the semicircular line. You can also approach the preperitoneal from here also. You can do that. But this is the safest option. Why? Because you got a tenuous or a tendinous sheath lying behind, which is basically giving added strength so that you don't damage the underlying peritoneum. So the first port and the umbilical port are to be kept inside the sheath. First port inside the sheath, preferably, not always. Posterior sheath is very easily injured. Now, when you're trying to push in the port here, you can very easily injure the posterior part. I'll show you in the video that I'm going to show with the accompanying presentation. So it is very easy. So the first site of peritoneal injury could be right when you're putting the first port inside. Or second is when you're putting the second port in the umbilical region. Again, peritoneal breach and pneumoperitoneum. So these are the 2 commonest sites where the peritoneal breach is done, apart from, of course, when you're doing a dissecting, you damage the peritoneum anywhere. But these are the 2 sites where the direct port introduction can give rise to a peritoneal damage. So positioning these ports, the umbilical port and this, is always guided with the help of a needle. I'll show you in the video what I mean by that. The transabdominal and sheath sagittal section. Now, I just wanted to show you this. So this is the umbilicus area, and here you're going into the port. So you have separated the fiber rectus abdominis. This is the rectus abdominis, right? You have removed the fibers, and you have entered the rectorectus space. And here you find that the inferior epigastric artery. So you're going here, and this is an area. The inferior epigastric artery will stick to the rectus abdominis. Why? Because it is going to supply the rectus from below. So it sticks. So you are basically entering a plane below the inferior epigastric. So the rectorectus area below up to the arcuate line, from there you transgress the transalis fascia and then go and enter into the preperitoneal fascia. That is the route that your trocar is going to take. Also shown here, this is the trocar path, this is the umbilicus out here. This is basically the posterior rectus sheath, the arcuate line here. And behind the rectus sheath, you got the vesico-umbilical fascia or the transalis fascia. And this is the transalis fascia, which is found in various forms. We had talked about transalis fascia in one of the lectures that I have been regularly holding on the net. And if you want, you can go and look it up. What are the variations of transalis fascia in the inguinal region? And it could be found as a real fascia, it could be found as a filmy layer, or it could be absent. So you can have all the 3 things. So you transgress transalis fascia, and once you transgress this area, only then you're going to enter into the preperitoneal. So this is the path of the 10 millimeter trocar, and this is the thickness of the rectus sheath out here. About 10 to 20 millimeters is the thickness of the sheath. So this port goes about 1 centimeter inside and then would have to go horizontally. That is to be known, because if you're not careful, it can easily go in this direction. See, and what is here? Peritoneum. Below the fascia, peritoneum. So it easily goes and damages the peritoneum, and you have a pneumoperitoneum right at the start of a procedure. The arcuate line, just a few words about the arcuate line. I've shown you typical picture of the arcuate line out here. Now, arcuate line has been described by anatomists as a semicircular line. Do you find the semicircular line in every patient? No, you don't. This is the usual description. This is the arcuate line. This is a cadaveric picture. This is the arcuate line. Do you find this everywhere? No, you don't find it. You don't find it. This is basically, see, there's hardly an arcuate line out here. It's a gradual transition. A gradual transition. So in one, the termination is very, very clear. Here you can see the termination very clear. This is the preparietal space, right? This is the posterior sheath. Here you have the inferior epigastric artery. This is the preparietal fascia inside the rectus. Now, this is a type 3 arcuate line. See, can you see this line here and then one line here? So this is wrinkling of the arcuate. So these are two arcuate lines. So there are instances where you find type 1 arcuate line, type 2 arcuate line, and type 3 arcuate line. So 3 types of arcuate lines as of today. Type 1 is the commonest, 65%. The fibers of the posterior rectus sheath gradually disappear on the transalis fascia, creating an incomplete demarcation. So the cleared arcuate line is seen only in 25%. See that? See that? So you're looking for that arcuate line, you don't find it. And you're very perturbed, where is the arcuate line? I can't see the arcuate line. You won't be finding it in 75% of the patient. Why? Because only present 25. So that clear, acutely demarcated arcuate line is only 25%. The rest, 65, don't have it. 10%, they have a double or thickened aponeurotic line that I just now showed you. This was this one. See the two, right? This is the typical presentation in 10% of cases. So the arcuate line in the usual position. What is the usual position that we just talked about? So it has been, again, it does not have a special position. I said that it's found in the midway between the pubic symphysis and umbilicus, or 1/3 or 2/3. No, there's nothing like that. 3/4 of the time, it is at 3/4 the distance from the pubic symphysis to the umbilicus. That means you're measuring the distance from the symphysis to the umbilicus. Measuring from the symphysis to the umbilicus and 3/4 distance. That means 1/4 below the umbilicus. In the others, located upper half of the distance between the umbilicus and the pubic symphysis. And still others, they have shown that it's roughly 1/3 of the distance from the pubic crest to the umbilicus. Now, externally, in most of the instances, if you want to mark the arcuate line, a rough marking could be that you can have a tendinous intersection of the rectus abdominis across the anterior superior iliac spine. So anterior superior iliac spines, the surface location was about 1.8 centimeters superior to that level in most of the instances. Now, why is the arcuate line so important? We talk arcuate up 1, 2, 3. Why? Why at all? Why is it? Why worried about it? Let's forget it. No. It defines the limit from where the first time entry into the preparietal space is attempted of transecting the transverse fascia. That is the point where you go into the PP phase. You go to the PP fascia there. So you have to cut the transverse fascia at that point. Don't try cutting the posterior rectus sheath before the arcuate line has been arrived at. What are you going to cut? You're going to cut the underlying peritoneum. You're going to enter into the abdomen. It becomes intraperitoneal. So you have to define the lower limit, which is the arcuate line. Number 2, the site for cutting the lateral and medial edge of the arcuate line to enlarge the creation of the PP space. So when you're doing this surgery for enlarging the arcuate line, the medial edge and the lateral edge, I'll show you in the video. They are slightly cut so that you can easily negotiate the preparietal space. You enlarge on the preparietal. It facilitates the primary facial repair, which can then be supported with retrorectus onlay mesh depending on the clinical situation. So that posterior rectus sheath and the arcuate line tells you how much of the retrorectus space is being supported from below by the tendinous or by the fibrous posterior sheath. So the arcuate line defines the low limit of that. And in those patients where you want to harvest the rectus abdominis, if you got a good low arcuate line, you've got less chance of hernia developing. Why? Because the abdominal wall is being supported by the posterior rectus sheath. If you have a high arcuate line, then a lot of abdominal wall would be without any lower support. So it also defines the cranial, the point above which the rectus abdominis can easily be harvested in a myocardial slab. So clinical relevance of all this. See this figure. It's a very typical figure. And here you got the semicircular line. The semicircular line. This is the area. The purple shows anywhere you can put in the first port and the second port. The whole area is the area. This is the umbilicus. You can put in a port anywhere. Now, usual 3 centimeters and 3 centimeters. That is the usual and the best method. Why? Because beyond this, the inferior epigastric artery would be somewhere here, 4.5 centimeters. And above, this distance becomes important. Why do I say 3? You may ask, it can be 4 centimeters, 5, 6. Go ahead, do it. But what is the problem? You have the costal margin out here. The port that you're going to put here, the hamperment of the instrument would be there by the costal margin. So the tip of the 9 costal cartilage, below that, and the distance between the first port is important. So that distance D should be such that it is not going to make the movement of this telescope problematic. And that is why a 3 centimeter rule is the best to be followed, 3 and 3. So here we put in the first port, that posterior, the 10 millimeter port is a posterior rectus sheath. The second port could be towards the umbilicus, either on this side or that side. And the third port is below the arcuate line. Now, one thing before I go further, I want to tackle this hernia here, right side. I want to tackle this hernia, left side. Can I do it by this? Yes, we can do it. So what I'm trying to say is you can have a ipsilateral port positioning or you can have a contralateral port positioning, which means if you're trying to tackle the left-sided hernia, you can have the first port on the left side, or if you want to tackle the right hernia, you can still have the port on the left side. It is always better I follow the contralateral. Why? Because that gives me an added length out here. So a contralateral approach to the hernia, inguinal hernia, is always what I prefer. You can do a ipsilateral approach also. I've got nothing against it, but to me that appears to be slightly more or less cumbersome, so I do it. If I have a bilateral hernia, I can easily manage by just putting a port out here, and then I can manage both things. So this port is going to manage this hernia, this port is going to manage this hernia. So bilateral hernias can also be tackled with these 2 ports, or I can remove this port and put a port out here to tackle this hernia. So just one port repositioning can help you even with a bilateral hernia. So that is important about the port positioning. So remember, anywhere from the semicircular line to the midline could be the insertion point of the port. Now, this is the usual port position for ports for, this is the right inguinal hernia, the pubic bone, the umbilicus, and this is the port position. See, this is the alternate. Now, if you look at this figure, you'll find the port is here, umbilical and left iliac fossa almost, and the supraumbilical. Now here, see, this is the alternative. I put both the ports on the left side. So that gives me added length out here. Instead of one port out here, I put both the ports out here. So this is more ergonomically viable for me. I'm very happy with this kind of a port position. So that is the alternative port position for a E-TEP repair. So that doesn't mean E-TEP repair has to be done always with an umbilical port. This is the usual. See the umbilicus? That's the umbilicus, the 10 millimeter port, the umbilical port, and that is the left iliac fossa port. So that is the usual. That's the usual. But it is not necessary to have that. You can also do with an alternative position. Is that clear? Right. Now, this is very, very explanatory. I had to pick this figure up because for those who are not doing it, I think a lot of people are not doing E-TEP repair. The first 10 millimeter port insertion is very, very important. This is a 1.5 centimeter skin incision. And then I've got these small half-inch retractors and I've retracted. What am I seeing here is the anterior rectus sheath. Now I make an opening in the anterior rectus sheath. See this? Anterior rectus sheath made an opening and I pick up the upper leaf. The upper leaf has been picked up. This is the lower leaf. And now I pick up the lower leaf. It's very well depicted in this diagram, right? In this pictorial representation. Superior leaf, inferior leaf, right? Or rather, reverse. This is the inferior, this is the pubic side, this is the head side. So this is the lower leaf, this is the upper leaf. So the lower leaf has been picked up, the upper leaf has been picked up. Now what? Now I'm splitting the fibers of the rectus. The fibers is split. And what do I see in between? The posterior rectus sheath. See the posterior rectus sheath. Now I'm going to insert a half-inch retractor, devious retractor here, below this muscle. And I'm going to lift the whole muscle and the lower flap. So I've lifted everything up. Lifted everything up. This is lifting it up. So now what do I have? I have the retractor tip entering into the retrorector space. And now I'm going to introduce a blunt trocar or a telescope or a balloon, whatever I want to use, whatever you want to use. You can use any of these things. And remember, it has to go horizontally. Do not, for God's sake, put it obliquely. The moment you put it obliquely, you're going to go through the posterior sheath into the abdomen. Go obliquely, go parallel to the anti-abdominal wall. Go parallel to the abdominal wall. Once you enter the rectorector space, go parallel to the abdominal wall in a horizontal direction, and you'll be creating a very good track in which you can subsequently put in the 10 millimeter trocar. That's one method of doing it. I do it with a blunt trocar. This is a blunt trocar that I've used. I was using it even earlier for the TEP repairs. I'm using it for ETP also. A blunt trocar that creates a space for me. And then I push this cannula inside. This is very well shown here. See this. I've lifted up. I can see the posterior rectus sheath. You can very well visualize out here. The split fibers, and this is lifting it up and the posterior rectus sheath, and it can easily go into the space. It's very easily negotiable space. When you enter inside, what do you see? This is what comes into view. First of all, if you see this, you should be the happiest person around. Why? You are in the absolutely correct space. Why? I am seeing the posterior rectus sheath. I am seeing the cobweb appearance or the cotton wool appearance of the pre-peritoneal area. I am the happiest person now. I am into the correct space. I am not damaged the posterior rectus sheath. I go further. Now the sheath becomes much more clearer. And once I transgress the transalis fascia, now I enter into the pre-peritoneal space. Right? Seen out here. Can you see it very clearly? The lower part of the arcuate line. Lower part of the arcuate line. And you can see the vessel out here. You can see the vessels out here. The underlying the rectus abdominis muscle. So this is the dual arcuate that we showed. The first arcuate line and second arcuate line. Very well seen out here. The two arcuate lines, 1 and 2. And this is the pre-peritoneal fascia. These are the veins which are coming to the side of the rectus. You have to be careful and you're negotiating in between them because you don't want to have any hemorrhage into it. So what are the advantages of this ETP repair? Number one, more comfortable positioning of the ports, a larger pre-peritoneal space. So better maneuverability of the instruments, better ergonomics, larger mesh can be placed. Better tolerability. Let me tell you, even if you create a pneumoperitoneum in a TEP repair, the moment you create a pneumoperitoneum, you have to abandon it 9 times out of 10. Or you have to do something else. You have to push in a needle, a Winnie needle intraperitoneally so that it drains the carbon dioxide for you, and then you correct the procedure. This with ETP, a pneumoperitoneum does not create any problem. The moment you start doing it, you will find it. Allows unencumbered proximal dissection of the sac and peritoneum. You can even dissect on a very large sac, and that is why in those sacs which are very, very large, you can easily go in and do a ETP repair. And the pre-peritoneal space can be reached from virtually anywhere in the anterior wall, not only inside the rectus sheath. That's what I was trying to emphasize. Not only inside the rectus sheath, anywhere. And pre-peritoneal space in the lower abdomen is continuous with the retrorectus space beyond the arcuate line. I'll just show you what that means. So it's easier to learn and master. And let me tell you, it should be the starting point for residents to learn the TEP repair. They should go in for an ET repair. And the indications are all groin hernias, very large inguinal scrotal sliding or incarcerate hernias, which are contraindications for TEP. Obese patients, post-bariatric patients, very short distance between the umbilicus and pubic tubercle, again, a very important relative contraindication for TEP repair in patients with previous pelvic surgery. So in all these patients, you can go into an ETP. Now, this is the space I was talking about. This is the retrorectus. You have entered from here, and this is the arcuate line. You cut the transalis fascia, enter the pre-peritoneal fascia. So this whole thing becomes one continuous space. The retrorectus space becomes continuous with the pre-peritoneal space. That's what I wanted to show you, right? Now, let's see this video, and you'll be able to explain as we go along. There's a 3 centimeter and 3 centimeter. It's almost everything is written on the video itself. So we're creating this 1.5 centimeter incision. All the important steps will be seen. I've just now showed them on the slides. See the anterior rectus sheath. With the help of a number 11 blade, You just slit the anterior rectus sheath. You should have a very good camera operator. You can see the two edges of the sheath. Enlarge it. You can see the rectus abdominis muscle underneath. Now the fibers are being retracted. You have to be careful when retracting the fibers. Don't take this retractor when you're splitting the fibers rather. When you're splitting the fibers, be careful. Don't introduce the artery forceps tip. You can see the posterior rectus sheath, the white area. You can see it there. See there, the white area. Now the posterior rectus sheath has come into view. And what I was saying, I'm going to lift this up. See, this lifted up. I've lifted this up and I'm see this going almost horizontally. Going like this. See, you can see this going horizontally. Lifting the whole anterior abdominal wall up. Once I've done that, now I can easily push into the same. The retractor has to still be in place because that is defining that space for you. The inferior retractor is to be there. And now I'm going to push in. If it is going easily, you're in the correct space. The moment you encounter any kind of resistance, please stop. Please stop. Don't try to push it. If you push it, you go into the abdomen, into the peritoneal cavity. So you again reintroduce the trocar. You may have to do it a couple of times. Now, when you push in the, see this rising of the abdominal wall? The sheath is inflating. See the inflation of the sheath? So that confirms. Now you fix the trocar. That has to be fixed because it's lying in a space, and then the sides of the trocar, you should pack it with a simple gauze and there's no carbon dioxide leakage. Now this is the first view. And the first view going in. And I do a telescopic dissection only. I don't push in this thing. Now see this layer. This is a transverse fascia, very well seen out here, which I've been saying that you have a varial kind of transverse fascia. This underlying surface. This is transverse fascia. This is rectus abdominis, transverse fascia out here. Now going back in, we have cut the transverse fascia and we're going down into the preperitoneal space and do a telescopic dissection, do a balloon dissection, whichever one you want. But I've been regularly doing only telescopic dissection with the tip of the telescope. And I regularly do it with a 30 millimeter. Can you see the lighthouse? I've shown these pictures specifically. The lighthouse scene, pubic bone, the preperitoneal space of Ritzius, and this is the dissection of the preperitoneal space. Now, this is, see, could you see the needle for a short split second? Now that needle ensures that you're into the right space. And once you take out the needle, then you push in the second trocar. So this is the second trocar that I pushed in. And this is the trocar, which, now see that inferior epigastric artery. That is the inferior epigastric vessels out there. And they are being retracted laterally. This was the right-sided hernia being tackled. And I can now, initially it was a dissection only with the telescope. Now I am doing a dissection along with the first grasper that I put in, or the first dissector. Always keep identifying the pubic bone. That forms a landmark for dissection. That is can you see the pubic bone coming into view there? Now, once you've done that, you remove this transverse fascia out here, which I had shown you earlier. You can see the underlying rectus abdominis. See the rectus abdominis? That's the rectus abdominis. This is the transverse fascia we are removing. Very well seen. These are the double arcuate lines seen out here. And now, once I define the lower edge of the arcuate line, I'm going to cut the posterior rectus sheath. Why? Because I want to put a port somewhere here and I would like a free access to the opposite side. So I would like to cut the lower edge of the rectus sheath. So now I'm going to cut the lower edge of the rectus sheath using whatever means you have. You can use a harmonic, you can use a hook, or you can use whatever you want. I prefer doing it with a hook. Don't waste a harmonic just for cutting this. So with a hook retractor, with coagulation, now it is very important. You just saw me separating the peritoneum from underneath. It is very important that you separate the peritoneum from underneath, and only then you use to cut that with the hook. So with the hook now, you would like to, the lower edge is being cut. That's what I was talking about. The cutting the arcuate line either medially or laterally. So here we are cutting it medially. So here is the linea alba. This is the linea alba. Remember, don't go very medial to it. You will be damaging the linea alba. You should be at least 1 centimeter away from the midline. At least 1 centimeter. This distance is very important. If you don't take care of this distance, you're going to damage the linea alba. Right? So I'm going to create some more space for myself. so that I have, see how easily it's being created because I already separated the peritoneum from underneath. This whole thing is lying is the pre-peritoneum. And now I can easily see on the opposite side. See, the opposite side is seen. You can see the rectus there, the anteabdominal wall out there, right? And now the dissection is carried further. The pubic bone symphysis is seen, the space of bridges is seen, and you carry it further and try to dissect the opposite side with it. Now, this is how you put in the needle. See, that needle is pushed in so that you see whether you're in the right place or not. You're not puncturing the posterior rectus sheath. Once you're sure with the needle, you remove the needle, and in the same track, in the same direction, you push in the port. Because, as I said earlier, this is the second point where you can damage the peritoneum. Initially, when you're doing it for the first or second time, I usually managed to damage the peritoneum when I was putting in this umbilical port. So later on, we decided on doing it with the needle and then pushing in the port and pushing it very gently and under direct vision. So you don't puncture the posterior rectus sheath. So this is dissection in the Bogrov space, which is lateral to the cord structure. This is the Bogrov space, lateral cord structure. This is the cord structures out here. So you go on laterally and creating a space for the mesh lateral. You can see the pre-peritoneal tissue very well. The pre-peritoneal tissue. And the moment you find that you have some kind of a peritoneum peeping anywhere, you stop dissecting. And then don't use blunt dissection. Then you start using your scissors to cut the pre-peritoneal fascia. And that's what you're going to do in this place. You can see the underlying vein there. Can you see the vein out there? So I don't want to damage that vein. So now I would like to cut it. Now this is the inferior epigastric vessel coming out here on the opposite side. Because now I'm on the opposite side. My port was put on the right side and now I'm doing a dissection on the left side. So this was a contralateral dissection being done and the contralateral method of doing a ET. Now once I have got enough space laterally, either you do this before or you do this after the sac has been deposited. Now, unfortunately, this was a direct inguinal hernia. You can very well see the transalis fascia. Can you see the transalis fascia out here? The edge of the transalis fascia. And you can see the reposition. So that is the loose transalis fascia forming the sac and these sac contents. You easily deposit it back. Deposition done. And now the knee. You can see the pubic tubercle there. That is the pubic tubercle. You can see the pubic tubercle. That is the tubercle. This is the tubercle. Once I define the tubercle, that is the tubercle, the pubic symphysis. And now I'll strip the peritoneum. You can see the margin of the peritoneum there. You can see the margin. That's the margin of the peritoneum. So you remove the margin of the peritoneum and you hold it and then you strip it of the cord structures. The stripping of the cord structures. I have to be gentle with it and see the amount of play that I have with my finger, with my instrument. Compare this to those who are doing DEP and you'll find that you hardly have any space, this much space to play about with your instruments. You don't, here you have a lot of space to play about with. You can easily do any kind of dissection. So much space laterally, so much space medially to the cord structures on the right and the left. And again, you use a hook to remove the adhesions with the cord structures. Be careful not to damage the vas deferens and the cord structures. And this is lateral area. I'm not going to go into the principles of the TEP repair, just showing you ETP, but laterally, remember, do not dissect under the psoas fascia. Don't do that. The moment you go under the psoas fascia, you're going to damage the nerves overlying the psoas fascia, namely the lateral cutaneous nerve of the thigh and the femoral branch of the genitofemoral nerve. So laterally, when you do a dissection, do not strip the fascia of the psoas muscle. And if you got this kind of a dissection, you're sure you're in the right place. This kind of dissection ensures that you're in the right place. Now, then medial dissection, it has to be stripped of the peritoneum. And remember, the peritoneal stripping, that is the vas deferens there, and the peritoneal stripping has to be done until the vas curves under it. The 10x15 polypropylene mesh pushed through 10 millimeter port. With this kind of dissection, you can easily also accommodate a 12x15 mesh very easily. You can easily do that. Now, once that is inserted inside, insertion is very easy. Again, going into the retractor space and going forward. And I always just put it like a cigarette and unroll it below. I don't unroll it above, I unroll it inferiorly. And the positioning should be such that it is going beyond the pubic symphysis. You can see the symphysis out here, that the area of the symphysis. So it's going beyond the symphysis, because especially more so because it was a direct inguinal hernia. So in direct inguinal hernia, it should be always beyond the symphysis and going toward the contralateral side. The lower edge should always be accommodated across the psoas. This is the edge. The lower edge is very important. It should be accommodated across the psoas. And then once you do that, the tackers come into play. The rest of the dissection is just like any other TEP or a TAPP dissection. So I'm not going to waste too much time over that. This is the pubic symphysis. So the tacker is going to apply it just above the bone. Remember that, because applying it over the bone is going to create a lot of postoperative pain. So never apply a tack over the bone. It has to be applied just above the bone. And to the upper outer corner are the 2 tacks that I apply. If need be, 1 or 2 more tacks on the medial side. Otherwise, that should be enough tacking for ETP repair. That should be enough. The positioning of the mesh, the final position of the mesh should be always ascertained, that there is no kinks to it and it is very well spread out. See, so if the space is enough, how do you know the space is enough? The mesh immediately spreads out. See how well it's spread out without any problem. So that is how the thing is spread out. So this is basically what I want to tell you about ETP. This was more of an introductory lecture to ETP. So I wanted to impart what I learned by myself, because I did not follow. I just saw 1 or 2 workshops and then I did myself. So I just wanted to impart to you the nitty-gritties of the initial 10 millimeter port. That is what is required. The rest of the section is just like in whatever you do in a TAPP and a TEP repair. But the initial port positioning, for 10 millimeter and the 2 port positions are very important, and how you cut the arcuate line, taking care. If you're cutting it laterally, not too much of a problem, but if you're cutting the arcuate line medially, you have to be very, very careful that you're not cutting the linea alba, not damaging the linea alba, because if you're doing so, then you're converting inguinal hernia into a future development of a midline incisional hernia, which has to be iatrogenic, because you have managed to damage the linea alba, leading to divarication of the rectum. So this is how you should start doing an ETP, and I recommend that everybody should start doing ETP repair. Now, there is a question, what is the importance in first port placement? In first port placement, the importance of arcuate line is not there. The importance in the first port placement is the importance only of the infraepigastric artery and the semilunar line. The arcuate line is not important as far as the first port placement is concerned, but very important when you want to put in the umbilical port. You want to put in the umbilical port, then you have to create space for it by cutting on the arcuate line. ETP for urinary, yes, it's basically ETP for all groin hernia, not only inguinal. Why only inguinal? All groin hernias, direct, indirect, femoral, obturator, all hernia. And now ETP is done for all hernias now. It's also being touted as the next best thing for a laparoscopic ventral hernia repair that I just not told you. But then to me, for a simple small umbilical or epigastric hernia, trying to do a ETP, which now most of the people are advising. I've seen people doing it and they managed to damage the linea alba, all the while explaining that you should not damage it, and they damage it. You have to go to the opposite side. What's the fun of creating so much of prepetrol dissection if you can do just with a plain and simple IPOM? Mesh use in ETP is simple, polypropylene. Simple polypropylene. It's just like TEP or TAPP. You're placing the mesh preperitoneally. If you're placing the mesh preperitoneally, it's just simple polypropylene. Any company, polypropylene is the thing that is advised, and that cuts down on the cost hugely. You're not putting any kind of a different mesh there. It's just plain and simple polypropylene. So, are there any questions? So, I think I don't know if I managed to put across the basic technical aspects of the ETP repair, which I was wanting to do since a long time. Because the first port incision is where people get bogged down. The first port, initially also, let me confess that I tried it 2 years back, and the first board placement I did in 2 cases, and then I gave it up. I said, why not? Let's keep continuing DAPP, and it appears to be very well alternative. Why go to all this? Why go to all this kind of dissection? But 1 year back, I think almost now 1 year back, when I started doing EDP on a regular basis, now I'm so much enamored by it that I find it to be perhaps even better than DAPP. And of course, it is. You don't use so many tags. You don't have to do suturing and things like that. Was the advantage of TEP over DAPP. So here you got huge amount of space. The ergonomics is much better in a ETP as compared to a TEP. So I would recommend ETP to all the residents and also to surgeons who are wishing to go in for some kind of a TEP repair for inguinal hernias. If there are no other questions, I think.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sir. No
So
more
thank you so
questions. I
much.
think we can.
Yeah. So thank you so
Yeah,
much.
Vishal,
I
go
think
ahead.
that was a great learning experience for the attending surgeons as far as IPOM Plus, and ETAP approaches are concerned. Dr. Rajeev Sinha, sir, known as a great orator and trainer at national and international platforms, has nicely demonstrated and presented tips and tricks involved in these surgeries. Sir, on behalf of Medtronic, we thank you, sir, for giving us opportunity to collaborate with you for this informative webinar. Thank you so much, sir. I also thank
Medtronics and all of you working in Medtronics. Thank you to Vishal. Thank you to Aarti, who've been regularly visiting me, and to Asavri and to Vishal, and to all the people in the Lab Guru group. Thanks to all of you for this broadcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. We will wish to have such in physical way also. We have done this webinar, but in future, as a physical events, we can proceed with. Sir, I also thank all the attending surgeons to make this session interactive through questions and answers. Thank you, attending surgeons. And yes, finally, the Lab Guru team, thank you so much for making it happen successfully. Thank you, Asavri. Thank you, Chetan.
Yeah, thank you, Chetan. I forgot to mention your name. I'm very sorry. Thank you, Chetan.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, sir, once again.
Right. Okay, good.